Welcome to the Nightlife Podcast. Have you ever dismissed a dream as just the pizza or stress from the day? More often than we realize, the symbols and stories in our dreams contain divine revelation hidden for us to discover. Once you realize this gift that's been yours all along, you'll never go back to spending the nightlife just sleeping. My husband recently spent time with a cattle rancher here in Colorado who showed him a tree that has a name and a story. They call it the Trudy tree, named after a woman who lived nearby. When it was time for her to leave her lifelong home, she requested to be taken to this tree one last time. This was her touching goodbye to the tree she had looked at through her kitchen window as she washed dishes every night for 70 years. It's hard to hear that story and not become misty-eyed, because we understand how this tree served as a witness to all her days and seasons coming to their final chapter. Maybe this brings to mind trees that you have known and lived under, still standing as keepers of time and memories from long ago. Trees are one of the most prominent symbols in creation and the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, as you'll hear more about in the following interview. They even appear in our dreams from time to time. Recently, I had a dream about a pastor and his wife skillfully harvesting a tree orchard that belonged to a couple in their congregation, a picture of them offering the fruit of an entire season of their life to the church. Most dreams like this one are bursting with visual imagery. Studying symbolism in dreams has naturally led me into the study of biblical symbolism, which, let me tell you, is a world of its own, offering endless rabbit trails of curiosity, more than I actually have time for. One of these pathways, however, led me to discover Kelly Madden and his amazing Seeing the Keystone project. Today, I'll share my discussion with him on the topic of biblical symbolism and how it relates to dreams. I'm learning that every detail in the Bible, just like dreams, is intentional and packed with layers of meaning. And it's up to us how deeply we want to engage mining for the gold that's there. Why did God put two trees in the center of the garden with Adam and Eve, the fruit of one permitted and the other forbidden, with such grave consequences attached to his instruction? Of all types of trees, why did Abraham's divine encounter with the three visitors happen under a terebinth tree? What does it mean when Israel is compared to a terebinth tree, and in other places a fig, olive, cedar, or palm? Why was God so specific about the types of wood to be used for the construction of the ark, the tabernacle, the temple, and all the objects to be used therein? What's the significance of Jesus teaching that the kingdom of heaven is like the small mustard seed that grows into a large tree? Thinking symbolically involves moving beyond the obvious to considering the profound meaning of everything that exists. As a launching point, consider the following symbols in the Bible and creation and how they reveal patterns at all levels of reality. Heaven and earth relating to order and chaos. Light as divine, life, and truth, contrasted with darkness as evil, death, and ignorance. Water is a powerful symbol of transformation for good or evil. Consider cleansing, purification, and baptism through water. And conversely, the chaotic waters covering the earth before creation or the destruction of the flood. Trees and mountains illustrate meeting places between heaven and earth, ascent towards God, stability, and growth. Circles can equate to what is eternal, the cycles of creation and divine harmony. Gardens typify sacred spaces of relationship between God and man, harmony, and spiritual growth. Doors are thresholds, indicating a choice and opportunity for transition into new realms, new life, and salvation through Jesus, who calls himself the door of the sheep. That's referring to us. How about seeds demonstrating potential, resurrection from death to life, growth, transformation, or future provision? These are just to name a few, and I'm so thankful to be able to glean from the work of others in the world of symbolism. I'll link several resources in the show notes and hope you'll be inspired by today's interview. Kelly Madden is the author of the free Substack newsletter, Seeing the Keystone, Notes on Symbolism in the Bible. Each day he posts a brief explanation of one symbol from one chapter of the Old Testament. Kelly is the founder and executive director of the Boston Fellows Program, a faith and work organization that equips young professionals to serve God and neighbor in the working world. This is my fourth time trying to say what's next. He's also an ordained Anglican clergyman with a Master of Divinity from Gordon-Conwell Theological Seminary and a PhD in political theory from the University of York, England. Having worked in 45 countries on 5 continents, he and his wife Heather now live in Boston. Hi, Kelly. Thanks so much for talking with me today.
Great to be with you. One of the first things I wanted to say, Sandy, is I really appreciate what you're doing. I think it's wonderful. I think it's excellent. I appreciate your attitude, your heart towards all this, how careful you're trying to be, how godly you're trying to be. And so more than that, I think it's a really important thing for this time. And we can talk about that more later. But I think, frankly, that what you're doing is part of what God's doing in the world right now. One term that I've heard a lot is called re-enchanting the
Right.
world. Yeah. Any re-enchantment, rightly viewed, is God's work in the world
Right.
and making us aware of what God is doing, as well as what forces of evil are doing too, right? I mean, there's the so-called enchantment is the ability to perceive both what God is doing and what the forces of evil are doing, what demons and things are doing. And so I think this is important because you're tapping into that, you're making us more aware of these things. As you, I'm sure, know, these are things that have been lost in much of the modern world. And the importance of dreams, the importance of that aspect of reality has been lost in the modern world and to some extent even in the Christian world. Now, there are pockets and streams that have always appreciated these things, and thank God for them. But that's the first thing I wanted to say to you, is just that I think that that's an excellent podcast, and I really feel that you have responded, that this is God's call on your life and what you're doing. So that's what I wanted to say first of all.
Wow. Thanks so much. I appreciate what you do as well. And I'm thankful we came into contact through the Symbolic World community. So do you want to start by telling listeners a little bit about yourself and your Substack project, Seeing the Keystone?
Well, my day job is being the executive director of the Boston Fellows. The Boston Fellows is an outreach program of the Anglican Diocese in New England, and I am an Anglican clergyman, an ordained Anglican priest, or sometimes we say presbyter. But I don't have a church. My assignment is this ministry that serves Greater Boston and lots of churches in Greater Boston, called the Boston Fellows. And the Boston Fellows equips emerging leaders to serve God and neighbor in the working world. The main program is a 9-month program that it really gives, especially entry level, but sometimes mid-level and even later level career people, the framework, the concepts, the biblical foundations, principles to have a meaningful vocation, but also not just those sort of like ideas and practices, but also spiritual disciplines that will help them have off-the-job preparation for what they do in their work, as well as a tight-knit community within the class. And then I expose them to people in Greater Boston that are more experienced in various fields, Christians that are trying to serve God and neighbor in the working world and have a lot more experience. So that's my main job. That's what I do. I started this program almost 16 years ago now, and it's a blast. It's the funnest job I've ever had. But I think you and I came in contact because you saw a Substack that I run called Seeing the Keystone.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I'm glad it's helpful for you. The subtitle is Notes on Symbolism, Notes on Biblical Symbolism.
What was your inspiration starting that?
Several years ago now, I started reading Jonathan Pageau. I saw an interview of him and listened to him stuff. Eventually, I even had him come speak for me and read his brother's book, Language of Creation, which is in some ways a very difficult book. And then it opened my eyes to a lot more symbolism in the Bible than I was aware of, a lot more meaning. And that's really what it's about. It's about meaning, seeing the patterns that give much more meaning to what is going on in the Bible. About 2 years ago, then I took a sabbatical for the first time in 40 years of ministry and took 4 months to just dive into it wholeheartedly. Coming out of that, I began to blog on Substack what I was seeing, 1 chapter a day, to try to see what I was seeing and trying to record what I was seeing. And as I'm sure you've learned in your own experience with podcasts, nothing equips you better to understand than having to teach it to somebody else, trying to say it well enough that it actually conveys something that you're confident about. So It's been transformative in my walk with God. It's not just an intellectual pursuit, but I'm seeing a lot more meaning in the world about me. I look at a tree and see, look, there's its roots that I can't see underground, but they're in the earth, and there's its branches in the sky, in heaven, the lowest part of heaven. And between those two, there's a trunk. And so a tree is a mediator between heaven and earth. And I am like a tree, and I am a mediator between heaven and earth, as are all people.
Yeah, that's so good.
You know, the thing that I saw early on that I feel was the most sort of important guideline is I try to remember every day to pray that prayer from the Psalms that says, "Open my eyes that I may see wonderful things in your law." And when I've prayed that, I always see something. Sometimes I see a lot. Sometimes I see some amazing things. Sometimes I just see some small thing that I try to focus on. Sometimes it's right at the heart of what's going on. Sometimes I compare it to like the theme song that's in the background. You know, you got a movie that's going on and there's this theme song that relates to the big picture, the big overarching picture of the movie. It's the theme song that you're going to hear, and every time you hear that, you're going to think of that movie or whatever. Sometimes it relates to that big overarching story of God's redemption of the world. Sometimes it's more at the heart of whatever that particular scene is, that particular story. And to really understand what's going on, you need to understand that symbol. So it's called Seeing the Keystone because I came to realize when I started working on this whole aspect of symbolism that I think it's Psalm, is it 118? I should have looked this up. It talks about the stone that the builders rejected became the cornerstone. And one of the ways that you can translate cornerstone is not just cornerstone. It can mean foundation stone. It can mean capstone. It can mean also keystone. But keystone is probably one of the most important ones because Jesus Christ is not only the cornerstone and the foundation stone and the capstone, but if you look at a keystone, in an archway, an actually stone archway, it can be just a design feature that people use, and it's not really doesn't have any functional purpose. But in bridges and architecture of stone, it's the last stone that goes in. You've got two pillars on the sides, sort of up and down structures on the sides, and then the arch starts, right? And at the very top, what holds that arch together is the keystone. And it is a different shaped stone than any of the others. In one sense, it doesn't fit, except at that very key place. And it is what holds the entire structure together. And an archway with the pillars on the side is a symbol of heaven and earth. The side symbols, the side pillars are earth, so to speak. They're upright, they're square and level. That symbolizes the earth. Any arch or sphere or arc or circle represents heaven biblically. And so the keystone is right at the top of both heaven and earth. In Christ, all of heaven and earth come to have their meaning. It is what holds the whole structure together. And that has been seen for a long time by people who've understood biblical symbolism a lot longer than I have. The church where I attend has a lot of those inside and outside. Every window has a keystone over it. And so I'm often reminded of that. But coming to understand that place and how it all goes back to the keystone was the inspiration for the title that I gave my Substack.
Okay, I love hearing the backstory. That's great. You have a constant visual reminder of that in the architecture at your church.
It's been a fascinating journey, and I hope to keep developing it into more and more practical uses and showing people how things actually impact our lives. Right now, it's been mostly just seeing the symbol, pointing it out, and letting people practice things themselves, but I hope to lead them in more spiritual formation in days to come.
Wow, that's so fascinating. I think I'll see Jesus now every time I look at an archway. And really, that is the foundation behind symbolism, that it all points toward Jesus. That reminds me of what Paul said in Romans 1, how what may be known about God is clearly seen through what's been created. What are your thoughts on that?
Jesus is the key to all symbolism. The entire Bible, the Old Testament, all of the New Testament points toward Christ, and he is the key. Mathieu Pajot, whom you're reading, his book, The Language of Creation, is interesting because it's a commentary on Genesis. And although he's a deeply committed Christian, he doesn't actually mention Jesus or any of the New Testament in that book. And it took me a long time to understand what's going on. Because when you read the book and when you finish it, and I've read it, I don't know, like 5 times, it's in one way super simple, but in the other ways, it just blows your mind when you're trying to understand what's going on there. I finally came to realize the entire book is kind of a riddle, the answer to which is Jesus Christ. So Jesus is the key. And Matthew himself has talked about the fact that there's this lock and we have the key. We know that the answer is Jesus, but it can become very trivial to make the answer Jesus all the time. It's kind of like the math book. I don't know, your kids are younger than mine. I don't know if math books still have the answer in the back. There's you go back and look at the back of the math book and you got the answers there. So the problems in the front, got the answers in the back, but the object is not to find the answer. You got the answers. It's to show your work along the way, how you got that answer. And what Matthew is trying to do, and what I've changed my focus as well, is to realize it's easy to get to Jesus because it all does point to him. But the harder thing is to show just how magnificent the key is and how complex and how rich the lock is that he unlocks. It's not a skeleton key that goes in and kind of clunkishly turn it. It's like a 4,000 tumbler lock that only one key could ever possibly have opened. And so the richness of that lock is kind of what I think we sometimes have underappreciated. Yes, we have the answer, we have the key, but to understand just how beautiful that key is, how rich it is, how complex it is I think part of the challenge of what we face right now, because it's been lost. We have the key, but we don't really understand the lock.
Right. That's so well said. I was just talking to a friend today. She has some decisions to make. So we were talking and praying together. And I was telling her how most of the time when I'm waiting for an answer, it comes at what seems, from my perspective, to be the 11th hour, the last minute. But I've thought if God has an eternal kingdom and his goal is mature sons and daughters, it makes sense that he would maximize every situation for our growth and our maturity in our faith. He already has the answer. He already has everything we need. It's done. That part's already finished. But through waiting, we're in the process of learning how to partner with God, how to wait on him, how to trust him when we don't have the thing in our hand, but we can still have peace because we believe he does. We make it, like you said, about getting the answer or the thing itself. That's already done from heaven's perspective. So it really is about who we're becoming in the process. And I say that about dreaming all the time too.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. The reason, both in dreams, but especially from the point of view of what I do in trying to understand biblical symbolism, is that we tend to read the Bible for those really super practical, how do I make my life better? Just give me the answer, just show me how this works, give me this inside interpretation. And that's the modern standpoint, is what's it made of? How does it work? How can we turn this to our advantage? And that has brought tremendous material prosperity to the world. I mean, you and I live better than Louis XIV did. Even though he had gold faucets, he didn't have dental care, he didn't have, running faucets. So that focus on how it works, what's it made of, has given us tremendous material blessings, but we're spiritually impoverished.
Right.
Because we don't see the big pattern, we don't participate in the big pattern, we don't see meaning. Our lives lack meaning. People have stuff, but they are desperate for meaning. And that's what symbolism is. In reading the Bible for symbols, they give you the meaning, they give you where the story is going, and they're like these flashbacks and these flash forwards that tell you how the story is going to turn out and why it's so important and what your role in it is. And that's what dreams do too. It's not about just how would I solve this problem quickly and maximize my advantages in life, but really, who am I? What am I becoming? What's the story that God is leading me on? Is there an arc to this story that I am becoming? I'm becoming more like Christ. It can be deeply painful to have to go through this process, but that is character development, and that's what the story is about.
Yeah, that's so true.
One of the things that I wanted to talk about to sort of hopefully make this profitable for your listeners, to make that meta understanding, the big symbol, or the big two categories throughout the Bible that are important for symbolism, is heaven and earth. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's the first verse of the Bible, and it's absolutely essential to understanding symbolism, but I think also dreaming and sleep. So God is outside, in this sense, both heavens and earth, right? God is before the entire spiritual order. God is before the entire material order. And these are not just sort of abstractions, but they are really sort of two categories of reality, the spiritual and the material, the heavens and earth. And they're a pattern that you're going to see again and again and again throughout the Bible, from the very highest to the very lowest. If you were to go outside right now, wherever you are, I guess you're in Colorado, right? And
Right.
I'm here in Massachusetts on the shore. Out my office window, I can actually see the ocean.
Nice.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's the best office I've ever had. If you go outside right now, you get, away from a lot of construction where it's sort of a natural landscape. You're going to see two things. You're going to see the heaven above and you're going to see the earth below. And those symbolize to us heavens and earth in the way that the Bible talks about it. In other words, the visible heavens, what we can see, cloud, sky, sun, moon, stars, all that symbolizes the entire invisible order, the spiritual order above, and the earth below ourselves, the ground below our feet, and then what we can't necessarily see, both of the material world, the things that we can't see, but also of sort of like all that exists materially. That's what's symbolized by the earth below us. And anytime you're outside, you're seeing a symbol of heaven and earth. And even literally, the Bible talks about heaven as the skies. That's the sort of like the lowest level of heaven, so to speak. And then beyond that is higher and higher and higher up to the heaven of God himself above all. But the interesting thing is that when you're standing there, you're not just looking at it from the outside. You're in the middle of it. You literally stand between heaven and earth. When you stand up, your head is in the lowest heavens. Your capacity to imagine is like literally participating in the lowest heavens, and your feet are on the earth, standing on the earth, planted on the earth. And when you raise your hands, your arms and your hands and your fingers are actually reaching, so to speak, into heaven, into the lowest part of heaven. And so when you're standing there, you are a literal intermediary between heaven and earth. And that's not just sort of an image, it's a symbol. And I would even go to say it's almost sacramental in the sense that what that reality that you can actually physically see represents, again, even in your own person, a reality that you cannot fully see. You cannot see even your own spiritual reality in the fullest sense. But you are, in other words, a bridge between heaven and earth. Every human being is. It's our place in the world. God has given us that place. Not only is there a place in the world, that's what we're made of. We are made of heaven and earth. When the humankind is created, it's dust with divine breath blown into it. So the breath of God, literally God's breath, heaven is blown into dust to make a living human being, a nephesh. And even the animals to a very low degree have that life in them. So every living being, but especially humankind, is a meeting of heaven and earth. We are the combination of heaven and earth. Now, when we die, those two separate. The body goes back to the earth, dust to us, ashes to ashes, spirit to spirit. The spirit goes back to the unseen realm, and there's a lot we don't know about it. I won't talk a lot about that, but those two are separated. That's what death is. And in death, we're waiting for the resurrection of the body. That's the end of the game.
What you just described was my very favorite part of Matthew's book.
Really?
Just on a fundamental level, because I try to keep things 101. There were a lot of chapters that I didn't comprehend, and I'll probably have to go back to at some point. But what you just described is really foundational to symbolism, and then it all develops from there.
Yes, it really does. That's our place in the world, is to unite heaven and earth, to raise up earth to heaven and to bring heaven down to earth. And
Right.
in the Lord's Prayer, that's the heart of the Lord's Prayer. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, right? That's who we're supposed to be. To bring heaven to earth to whatever degree God allows us to have a part in that is who we are.
Right. And you correlated that to dreaming. I love how you seem to have caught the wonder of sleeping and dreaming, that for a third of our life, we go into an unconscious state and how we just take that for granted. But if you just pull back and consider what is the meaning of that, and you correlated that to death and resurrection. So feel free to speak to that.
Yeah, well, I think I mentioned to you in the Anglican tradition, and actually a good part of the liturgical church has the same idea, is that when you prepare for sleep every night, you should be aware that you may not wake up, and we're super vulnerable in our sleep. And so there is that sense that modern life, we're so comforted, and so life is in some ways so materially easy for us that we lose that perspective. But there is that tradition that, prepare to go to sleep. And even our children's prayers, the old children's prayers, should I die before I wake, pray the Lord my soul to take. Once upon a time, we taught children that, hey, you know what? You might die too, and you need to be ready. Are you ready? So going into sleep, in other words, is a sort of a mini death every day. And your body is almost like that. You're flat out. You have no control over your limbs when you're in full sleep, as vulnerable can be. And you're prostrate just like you will be in your coffin. coffin one day, and your mind is somewhere else. Your mind is in a different sphere. It's in, so to speak, the heavenly realm. And I think I've really appreciated that about what you said that you keep coming back to in the podcast, is that is where we're open to, and we're, in a sense, we're most receptive, I would say, too vulnerable.
For sure.
Because it's not just good forces that can have impact. I mean, most of human history has understood that we depend on God to protect us also from evil forces. So in our tradition is that we pray this prayer of Saint Simeon after he had seen the Lord Jesus. He's an old man, and he is going to be dying soon. And he says, Lord, now let your servant depart in peace according to your word. For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared before the face of all people, to lighten the Gentiles and to be the glory of your people Israel. So that's part of the preparation we have going to sleep. So during that time, we're sort of like in this mini heaven. The body is in darkness and all that darkness represents or can represent. But the mind is in the spiritual realm and is, as you say, open. And hopefully we're receptive to what God has to say to us. And then we have a mini resurrection, right? We come back to life, and that's the new cycle. But the importance of dreaming is not so much what happens when you're dreaming, is what you do with that then when you wake up. Hopefully listen to God's direction in your life, listen to the things he's telling you, changing maybe things that you need to change in your own life to become more like Christ. And so there's that cycle that every day is like a mini end of the world and a new world to come. Hopefully that you're seeing, a new day and a new cycle. And so that's, I think, sort of a meta view of what's going on in sleep and dreaming.
Yeah, I just love that. And heaven as encapsulating everything spiritual, not just a place we're going to go someday.
Yeah, right. I was raised in great churches, really good churches, and I thank God for them. But I think most of the church, including the churches that I work in, is not aware of really what the end of the game looks like. We talk in our language about going to heaven as if that was the final stop. We think about it as if that's all there is, and that's really where we're trying to go ultimately. But the reason I ask how many years was Jesus in a body is because it makes people aware, I think, of the foundation of seeing things differently. Now, most people, when I ask that, will say 33 years, right? But that's not correct, because he lived for 33 years, he died, but then he resurrected in a body. And the resurrection body, that's the beginning of a completely different world. Jesus' own resurrection is the beginning of the new heavens and the new earth, because he was not just resuscitated like Lazarus was or some of the other people were. He was in a new body. And it's a very mysterious body, because he seems to be able to do things physically that, show up in places that are behind locked doors. And there's many mysteries about it, but it's absolutely bedrock foundational that it is a physical body. He can eat, he's in presence, people can touch him, they can touch his scars. And then it's interesting, it's a scarred body. It's a glorified body, but it has scars as well. People can talk to him, can hear him. So it's a physical body, and he ascends in a physical body, and he will return in a body. And somehow his body is in the heavenly realm. Some people claim to have had appearances. Paul himself was knocked off his horse on the road to Damascus and had a revelation of the risen Christ there. And other people in history have claimed to have some kind of brief revelation of Jesus, and I think it's entirely possible. But he hasn't returned in the way that he talked about in glory, but it will be in a physical body. And the end of the story says also the new Jerusalem will descend out of heaven. Jesus, the carpenter, Greek word tekton, same word as we use for technology, has gone to prepare a place for us, but not that we're going to go be with him. He's going to come and bring it all down to earth in the new heavens and the new earth. The whole new Jerusalem descends out of heaven, and that's our final home. And again, there's a lot that we don't know that's hugely symbolic, and a lot of what we're told, I think, is to help us have something to hold on to, because Paul also says that we can't even imagine. We could not even imagine all that's going to be. He can't give us a literal description of everything, but yeah, that's the main thing, is to understand that the end game is to have a physical, resurrected body with a place to live that he has prepared for us, that will be somehow in the new Jerusalem, in the new heavens and the new earth. That's the end game.
Wow, that's a lot to think about. My brain is going in 15 directions at once.
Mostly how I was raised was this attitude that, well, everything material will be destroyed like once and for all, and we will live only in a sort of like ethereal thing. And it's kind of like action movies today where you see the hero and the girl, running away from the building and it blows up behind them. But then you have to ask yourself, well, where are they going to live
Yeah.
after the story? I don't think that's what it is. I don't think Christ and his bride are going to, escape into ether. I think that there is a home in the new heavens and the new earth. So my understanding of the fire is it's not a destroying fire, it's a purifying fire. It refines, it burns away the dross, and what's left are the jewels and the gold, and they're really the things that are done in Christ's name that truly will stand in the next age. And really, the best interpretive tool for the book of Revelation is the book of Genesis, because it's a bookend. And if you start looking at this and say, is there something about this in Genesis? Then it starts to really open up for you. For example, Jerusalem. It ends in Jerusalem, but Genesis is where Jerusalem begins, called Salem at that point. There's only two cities in the entire Bible that last from beginning to end: Salem, or Jerusalem, and Babel, or Babylon. From Genesis all the way to the end, those are the two cities. And it's really, the whole book is a war between these two cities from beginning to end.
Wow.
And then at the end of the story, there's this interesting thing where it says, and the sea will be no more. And you think, what does that mean? I really like the sea. I mean, I can look out my ocean. It really is truly a symbol to us. I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but what does that represent? Well, in the book of Genesis, that represents the flood and the possibility that all of earth will return back to the second day of creation. Second day of creation is the only day in creation where God does not say it's good. Why? Because it's only sky and ocean at that point. It's not bad, but it's totally inhospitable to human existence. And from that second day of creation, that sort of a warning, an implicit warning that could happen again. And it does happen again. That's what happens in the flood. There's a return to that second day of creation, and all of humanity is wiped out except for the ark. Same thing happens in Exodus, where Pharaoh has this flood. He tries to throw all the baby boys into the Nile, which is a sea of its own kind. The Red Sea, again, same thing. It's that flood, and then God opens up the land to walk through it. And again and again and again, this happens throughout the Bible. So the sea represents chaos and the potential of flood, and the sea is the dwelling place of Leviathan, Rahab, the monster, the great fish that swallowed Jonah, all those symbols. The serpent is what the book of Revelation calls it, the old dragon. That symbol goes all the way to the end. That's the dragon's abode, is in the sea. In Revelation, the dragon comes out of the sea. And so why is there no sea? Because that's the dwelling place of evil and chaos and death. I live near Gloucester, Massachusetts, and it's a fishing town. It's one of the oldest cities in this part of the earth. Just that town has lost 10,000 fishermen to the sea in accidents as they go out in their boats to try and fish. And the sea is dangerous, and it's a symbol to us of all its chaos. There is no sea in the sense that there's no place for evil anymore. The dragon has been defeated, and that's what that means. That's just one aspect of what's going on in Revelation that corresponds to what's going on in Genesis. And it's the bookend of Genesis is how we should see it.
That's really good. There's so much there. I dream myself and hear a lot from other people of dreaming on water. So it could be a pond or a lake or the ocean. And another really common symbol is the beach. I dream a lot about being on the beach. It's never relaxing. There's always a lot going on. So what do you make of that as a symbol in dreams?
If I had more information, it would probably be more helpful. But I would say right off the bat, it's the border between the land and the sea. It's always shifting. The waves are always coming on it. God gives us a border where the seas cannot pass beyond this, except when there's flooding or great catastrophe or something like that. But even then, they eventually go back to the sea. So it's that borderline between chaos and land, and it's sand. It's always shifting. It's like the sand comes, the sand goes. That borderline is not stable. It's not exactly liquid, but it's not exactly solid land either. So that would be the first thing that I would probably notice in what you said. Corrosion, erosion, waves, chaos. There's always that fight. That is where time takes every one of us eventually, even against what we build in space, the upright, the stable. We're constantly having to try and maintain that. In the end, time always wins, except for the grace of God and the resurrection. And
Yeah, that's so good. I would love to hear you speak on the difference between metaphor and symbolism and typology.
Well, there's even more categories. I think there's sacraments and there's the sacramental. There's many others. But a metaphor is sort of an arbitrary connection. You look at that cloud and you say, oh, that looks like a dog, and it's gone in a few seconds. And metaphor is almost like that. It's sort of like
This
arbitrary.
looks
They
like
showed
that.
up. Yeah, you make that mental connection. We're just like that cloud, and we see images that's how our mind works. We're constantly recognizing tiny patterns, but they're not permanent pattern. A symbol is more of a stand-in over the long range. So one of those is going to be a tree. I mean, there's a tree in Revelation, just like there's a tree in Genesis, and the tree goes all the way through, and the cross is a tree. That's a permanent stand-in for a structure between heaven and earth, and that's why it's such a powerful symbol, is because a tree has roots in the ground. You've seen trees fall over, you've seen those roots in the ground. They're in the ground, branches in the sky with a trunk between the two. And it's just like a human being, really. Those are very close together too. The human is a sort of living tree in a sense that tree itself is not. But Psalm 1, like a tree planted by living waters, so is the person who, meditates on it. It's an enduring symbol between heaven and earth all the way through. So that would be one example. Stars are enduring symbols of the angelic host. There's a really good reason to think that even in some way the 12 tribes of Israel are connected to constellations, where Joseph talks about, my star was here and all you other stars was bowing down. Well, that's probably referring to constellations that they connected themselves with.
Are there 12 primary constellations?
Well, there are 12 months in the year, and you can see 12 particular constellations that are associated with those 12 months. So the interesting thing is why 12? And it turns out that actually happens in other cultures as well, because of 12, crudely speaking, follows the 12 lunar cycles in the year. And I don't like to go down that path. I know a good friend in the symbolic world that she loves that stuff. I don't want to go down too far, but basically it's just that there is you can find first century Jewish synagogues, absolutely anathema to any idea of idolatry, but on their tile floors, they have the constellations corresponding to the 12 tribes of Israel, right?
Signs in the heavens is totally biblical.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. Sometimes it feels like a fine line between astronomy and astrology.
Yeah. And in the ancient world, there's not even a very fine line.
Yeah.
But the basic intuition of astrology is correct, but what they do with it is wrong. The basic intuition is there's a connection between heaven and earth. That is true. We know that's true. But what astrology misses is that they think the heavens, the stars, in the same sense that, what you can actually see, control what goes on earth. That's not what's happening.
Right.
The God who made the heavens and the earth, controls both of them and gives us in the heavens, from time to time, he gives us different signs and wonders and revelations that tell us something what's going on. The most obvious one, of course, is the star that guided the wise man to Jesus, but there are many, many others. Yeah, so the stars represent the heavenly host, and God seems to assign the angelic host to specific people on earth as well. The notion of guardian angel, that can be taken too far. Absolutely.
It's biblical.
Right. It's biblical. So that's what's being represented to us in the sky. It's another example of where that reminder has been taken away from us moderns because, one, we don't go outside at night. Two, we couldn't see the sky very well if we did go outside because of all the light pollution and that kind of stuff. But the entire sky, the stars above us, are heaven rotating more or less in a fixed fashion. That is the eternal round clock of the heavens turning around above us. It virtually does not change. There are falling stars. Those represent the fallen angels, etc. Much of the ancient world saw comets. They saw those pass, but they represented dragons. They were not good guys. Just like it says in Genesis, sun, moon, stars, they fix the times. We don't think about it because we're so used to it, but the sun fixes every day. The moon fixes the time of more or less of the month. It definitely fixes the time of tides. It fixes seasons. It determines heavens, the literal physical heavens determine so much of what goes on earth with seasons, times, days, all that kind of stuff. But that's also, like I said, it's a symbol of the fact that they're beyond what we can see. There's the angelic host, which is also present right here with us too, but symbolically it's out there. It determines so much of what happens in our realm as well. And there are other, I mentioned these two trees and stars in the heavenly bodies, but there are others. They're more or less permanently recurring. Certain numbers, as you've talked about, 6 and 7 and 40 and others, and we could go into those. So whereas metaphors are like, funny thing, that's like a cup. Sacraments are like permanent things. I'm in a tradition that believes, the bread is still bread that you take, the wine is still wine, but Christ is present in those things in a different way. I believe it's not just a remembrance, but that when we take the bread and we take the wine, that Christ is present in that, and that bread and that wine becomes a means of grace. Baptism, same thing. It's just water in one sense, but being baptized is a means by which God does something special in our lives. The church has different understandings of what's going on, but I think we all can understand that those are special marks and mark for us in the world in that way. So I guess the only thing to understand is that the permanence of these things differs. The bread and wine of communion, the Lord's Supper are like super important, and so is the tree, so is the cross, so is all these other things. So that's sort of a very broad brushstroke of what I mean by the difference between those kinds of things.
So metaphor is more like a loose or subjective correlation. Symbolism, you're saying, is universal. And then the sacraments, the extreme opposite is like the casual way, the modern church approaches everything. It's interesting because Paul said some have fallen asleep or died prematurely because they have mishandled that. Those are scriptures you're just like, what?
Yeah, totally agree. Mm-hmm.
The sacraments, and then how would you describe typology?
It's very broad. This is where the early church and the medieval church, they saw everything as a symbol of Christ. But it's only slightly different than a metaphor in that it almost always makes a specific connection to Christ. So, for example, you pick up a verse and you just find a way to connect it to Jesus, basically.
Well, I'm thinking of Abraham and Isaac.
Yeah, that's more than just a sort of a type. It really does become close to a symbol because all of one represents this and all of the other represents this. Paul actually makes that connection, right? In Galatians, he says that Isaac and Ishmael, in a sense, they're types, but they're also symbols too, in that there's a correspondence that really is across the ages. It's not just a sort of a very quick and easy connection that's kind of a little bit flimsy and maybe not necessarily too solid, that kind of thing. So there's typologies of Christ that are more enduring than others.
As I'm learning to read the Bible, searching for these types and symbols, it's the same spirit that wrote the Bible. It's the same spirit that's giving us our dreams. So, that's the way it connects. So
exactly, right. And God can use anything at all to speak to you. I have seen things where he's saying something to me very powerfully that nobody else necessarily would see in that situation.
Yeah, it's very personal.
It's very personal, and there's some things that I will never even share with anybody else because they're that personal.
I remember for years when I was a newer believer, I was constantly getting revelation about our relationship with God through my dogs and through like obedience. And, I would let them go. And then if they were just constantly willfully disobeying, I'd give them a beep or give them a shock. And then they would come right back. I started to understand the relationship between suffering and obedience, and how sadly, when I'm suffering, I seek God in this really wholehearted, I'll do anything, just show me way, and how sometimes it takes suffering to sharpen my obedience, to sharpen the quickness and even my willingness to respond to him, just like my dogs. So for years, I was seeing metaphor in my relationship with my dogs and me and God.
That's actually, I would almost say that's closer to symbolism in a sense, because it's hierarchy and you represent heaven to them. You have been established by God as God's regent over the animal world, domestic animals, wild animals, To your point, I mean, yeah, I don't trust God unless I have to. That's the sad reality in
Right.
my own life, And but the point about hierarchy is another one of those symbols that you see throughout the Bible, and I don't even know if it's symbol as much as it's just the way the world works. The heavens are stratified. I sort of talked about that. The lower earth and the demonic realm are stratified as well. Even in the realm where we are, the earth, is stratified from the lower heavens where we have access and to, the animal world but also kings and presidents and others. I mean, that's organization. Every organization has to have that kind of willingness to give to somebody the direction and the ability to make
Right.
decisions. And so hierarchy can absolutely be misused and is often, but the best hierarchy does reflect that heaven and earth structure on earth as it is in heaven, but it's a mutual relationship where God is recognized as one and recognizes as one place, and through that blesses everybody else and brings flourishing and prosperity to people who are willing to walk in his ways and do things the way that he wants, which is only our good. I mean, he has no other purpose, no reason to create us, to create the world, than to bless us and to love us and to bring us into his very being in some way. I mean, that's part of the end game too. God committed himself to our well-being permanently in Jesus Christ. That's how much he loves us, is that he didn't become a human being for 33 years, but for all of eternity forward. And ultimately, of course, on the cross is where we will see it. But it's that permanent dwelling with us in human form, living right with us, that we understand God's great commitment. Peter says we participate in the divine nature through Christ. This morning, my wife and I were just coming off a vacation a few days in New Hampshire, and we were sitting beside a mountain stream, looking at it, thinking about it, meditating about it, looking at the trees beside the water, thinking about, oh, look, those trees are really lush, and you see certain species of trees along the water that you don't see off in the woods. It's mostly just pine trees. So what does that tell us? Well, this afternoon on, I will not get my water from a stream. I will not be looking at a stream until I go fishing again. I can see trees out the window, but unless I'm concentrating, I'm not going to see that. So we don't have wells, we don't have streams and mountains. We're not outside. We don't know where the sun is. We don't look at the stars. We're not really subject to the weather as most of humans have been across most of history. It's all mediated to us. I mean, I'm looking at a picture of you, and you and I have not met. I'm trusting that that's kind of what you look like, and you of me. It's all mediated by this technology that cuts us off from this. Now, again, I'm thankful for technology. I'm thankful for modern medicine. I'm thankful for faucets. That's where I get my water. I get my water from faucets, and I'm healthier than most of human history has been because of all these technological advancements. But we have also lost something, and that's what we need to recognize. So we have to be intentional to get outside, to spend time looking at a tree. A lot of this came to me, just to give a personal example. I was spending a lot of time trying to understand symbolism and all these ideas, working very, very hard at it intellectually. And then one day we happened to live about a quarter mile from the beach, and I just went down the hill, sat on the beach, looked at the sky, looked at the water, looked at the sand, looked at the buildings over there, looked at the birds, and it all came together for me in a way that I wouldn't have otherwise. And so one of the things that I want to do soon is to put together a series of exercises that will allow people to experience the symbol of a tree in a way that is not just kind of abstract here in the mind, but you can actually go out and look at the branches above, look at the roots below, and experience it in that kind of way. And that's kind of what we need to do. Not just look at Jacques Cousteau and see underwater shows that are marvelous in what they show us, but actually go out and look at the waves and watch waves pounding against the shore, eroding ashore, whatever, all these kinds of things. So we're cut off from seeds. I don't get my fruit from a tree. I don't get my bread even from somebody that I know. It's just on the shelf there in the plastic bag, and it's all sliced for me and everything. So I think part of what we do to actually experience these things is to actually try and get as close as we can to what's being described to us in Scripture.
That's really good. The real. I have
Mm-hmm.
I have a sign where our phones sleep at night, and it says do more things that make you forget to check your phone. And I'm raising
Yeah.
my children. I've always been like, do real things with your hands and real people. It's just it's such a challenge in this generation where everything is on a device to where you think you're experiencing something real, but
Right.
you're not.
Right.
And
Yeah,
it's
it can
interesting.
stimulate us in it almost infinitely in different directions. It's limitless almost where we can go with those kind of things. So
Right.
we just have to be intentional. That's what modern life is to be. We have the choice if we want to. We're not compelled to,
Right.
but we have to be intentional. We can't just float along. We're going to have to actually decide that we're going to do these things.
Right.
Making us hopefully more tuned to meaning and to how God is trying to speak to us. I believe that God is talking to us constantly, but we do not have ears to hear, and we do not have eyes to see, and we do not pay attention to our dreams because we don't think that they are speaking to us or they could. Now, not every dream, you talk about this all the time. Sometimes it's processing thoughts, sometimes it's just the pizza. But again, I say even those we can bring before the Lord and say, what does this mean? And what do you have to say to me? And not just say, oh, that doesn't count. There's nothing there. No. Sometimes it is me processing my thoughts, but maybe I'm not processing them as I should be processing them. Maybe I need to really say, wow, if that's what I'm thinking about, maybe I'm not really trusting God in this area as I should be.
Totally. Well, thanks so much for sharing. I know it was probably effort on your part to keep it at the 101 level, but you did a really great job.
Well, good. So glad to chat with you. I feel like this is it's really great to be able to exchange ideas like this. I learned a lot.
It was great for me too. Thanks so much, Kelly.
All right. Bye-bye.
I'm so inspired every time I encounter vibrant Christians from different faith traditions like Kelly. I'll link his Substack in the show notes, a free download of the Book of Common Prayer, and a prayer Kelly recommends from the Compline before sleep. As Kelly mentioned, we were created for so much more than our five senses can comprehend. There's a spiritual life inside each of us waiting to be discovered and cultivated. God is inviting us into the higher realm of what He sees, what He thinks, and what He's doing in the world around us. We are constantly growing into His divine image and learning how to align with Him in every aspect of our lives. I like to describe the nightlife as going into a gold mine with a flashlight and pickaxe, searching for glimmers of gold and digging around to see what's there. As we lean into our God-given curiosity, becoming childlike and delighting in the process of learning and growing, we will take our places as the mediators between heaven and earth that God created us to be. Consider Paul's prayer in Ephesians 1 that we would know the exceeding greatness of His power toward us who believe. Also, his words in Ephesians 3, to Him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to His power that is at work in us. From the very beginning, we see God has chosen to do His work on earth in partnership with ordinary humans infused with divine power. We may look around and think, surely there's someone else who would be a better choice than me. But there's a reason the Bible is brutally honest about the flaws and failures of the people God used mightily throughout history, so that we don't idealize them and disqualify ourselves in the process. As the saying goes, God doesn't call the qualified, He qualifies the called. Dreams are one way that He meets us right where we're at and calls us higher into the destiny He had in mind when He created us. The choice is always ours. Will we answer the call or hide away, praying for the rapture while the world burns down around us? These are tumultuous as well as exciting times to be alive. It's time for the children of God to rise up and do heaven's work on earth, according to Jesus' prayer that we all know. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Please reach out to me using the contact button on my website at www.thenightlife-podcast.com if you have dreams to contribute or that you need help interpreting. I have a lot of upcoming episodes in queue that I can always use more dream examples for, including healing or deliverance dreams, direction dreams, warning dreams, calling dreams, and more. I can hear my dog whining outside the door to my podcast room, so I'd better go feed him now. Thanks so much for listening.